Okay, guys, today we are going to discuss the advanced concept. Okay, we will see how to implement reusable components. Okay, so far we have discussed, we have seen, how to group set of data members and member functions into a single unit. That we know that with the help of structures and classes, we'll be able to, group set of data members and member functions. And we also have seen like how to group only set of data members. So we know that using collections, we'll be able to store collection of data elements using a single variable. That is your collection. Okay, we have seen in how many different ways a collection can be implemented. We have seen all those implementations, all advanced implementations. We also have seen some linked list implementations like list, array list, hash table, dictionary, stack, queue, and hash set. Okay, those are the components that are implemented by Microsoft. If you are really good at this concept, you could also start implementing your own components like your hash table and dictionary. Okay, so let's move towards the next concept and more powerful concept in all programming languages like C# and Java, object-oriented programming. We also call as OOP concepts. Some people also call it as OOP concepts. What is means object-oriented programming? What is the need of your OOP? When you talk about object-oriented programming, this is going to be implemented in different ways. Those are going to be data encapsulation, data abstraction, inheritance, and polymorphism. The form can be anything, implementation can be anything, but the ultimate goal of your object-oriented programming is reusability. In any programming language, reusability. Whenever you want to develop a reusable component means what? If some component has been developed by you, so that has to be reused by different other components. For example, let's say you have written some math component which contains all geometrical and trigonometrical functionalities. In one of my class, in one of the scenario, I need to perform statistical operations. Why should I write the same program again and again since it is already there in your class, right? So if I start writing it again and again, so again, lot of complexity will be there, right? So why should I write it again and again? Rather, why don't we reuse your component? Read me. So why don't we reuse your component? If I can reuse your component, I don't need to write the same piece of code again and again, right? I can directly start reusing your functionality. So that way, you'll be able to save a lot of development time. You'll be able to save a lot of code. Your complexity will be decreased, right? So your component can be reused by n number of classes, n number of other components, right? So if something is being reused, you can save a lot of money, a lot of effort, a lot of revenue, right? If same functionality has to be developed in 10 different places, when should I go for a reusable component? If the same piece of code has to be written in 10 different places, what should I do? Develop it as a reusable component. Write it only once and start reusing it n number of times in n number of components. If something is getting duplicated, if something has to be written in different places, what has to be done? That something has to be developed as a reusable component. And that has to be reused in n number of places. So what is the main goal of object-oriented programming? So this is to develop reusable components. Any questions, guys?
No, sir.
And what are these
No.
four concepts? So these four concepts will help you to develop powerful reusable components. We need something to support us to develop reusable components, right? So that's why these are called as OOP principles. We also call them as OOP concepts. Some people will call it as OOP concepts. Some people call it as OOP principles. Already, so they can call it in any way, but ultimately these are the only four concepts that are available in OOP, which helps you to develop powerful reusable components. Okay, where it is Java, .NET, you can take any object-oriented programming language. You will see only these four concepts everywhere. Okay, these are the only four concepts that are being introduced by your OOP language, which helps you to develop more powerful reusable components. Any questions, guys, so far?
No, sir.
Okay, so if you are aware of these four concepts, done, you are done. That's all. You can create wonders in object-oriented programming language. That's all. This is what we have in OOP. Okay. So let's see one by one. Okay. First, let's go with, so out of these 4 concepts, you have already learned these 2 concepts. You had already learned. I'll tell you. Let's go through first concept, data encapsulation. Guys, try to understand the concept. Okay. Data encapsulation. What is data encapsulation? Encapsulating the data. Are you with me? So it means it is the process of binding data with its related functionalities. It is a process of grouping your data and data members into a secured single unit. It is a process of combining both data and related functionalities into a secured single unit. Now you tell me, whenever I need to combine both data members and member functions into a single unit, how can I do that in C#? You have to answer this question. Guys,
Data members and
whenever you want to group set of data members and member functions into a single unit, how can you do that in C#? Guys, I want to store, I want to group, like your container, like your bag. I want to group set of data members and member functions into a single unit, single container.
library.
Library, you're very closer.
List.
What is the library? What is the use of library? When you want to group set of namespaces. What is the namespace? When you want to group set of classes. What is a class? What is a class? Why do you need a class?
Which class?
Class is a set of collection of data members.
Data members and
Methods.
Yeah.
what is the use of a class? What are we doing with the class? We are grouping set of data members and their related functionalities into a single container. That is the need of a class and structure. Right? Who is grouping my data and member functions? It's class. If there are set of small bags, set of classes, if you want to group all your classes, then we require a namespace. If you want to group all your namespaces, then we require a library. But at the core level, who is grouping my data and member functions? It's a class or structure. Right? What is data encapsulation? It is the process of binding data with related functionalities. It is a process of combining both data and related functionalities into a single unit. It is a process of grouping, combining in the sense grouping both data members and member functions into a single unit. Who will do that in C#? That is class or structure. If I want to group all data members and their related functionalities in a single unit, who will do that? Class or structure? Is that true? Guys,
Yes,
respond.
yeah.
Is that true?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So we have already implemented the classes. We already implemented the structure. It means you have already implemented the data encapsulation. Encapsulating your data with related functionalities. We have written a class. We have defined some variables. And we have written some methods to operate those variables. Right? So what we did, we have grouped all our data members and their related functionalities into a single unit using both structure and classes. What is the main difference between structure and classes? Structure doesn't support inheritance. Class supports inheritance. So that's why using structure, you cannot develop reusable component. Technically, structure doesn't support these 2. Out of 4 principles, these 2 are very, very powerful and most important principles. Your structure doesn't support these 2, but class supports. That's why class has become very powerful and very popular. Already me. So out of this, we are already learned data encapsulation. So how do we achieve data encapsulation? Using a class. What is a data encapsulation? It is a process of binding data with related functionalities. It is a process of combining data with related functionalities into a single unit. It is a process of grouping data members and member functions into a single unit. That is called data encapsulation. What is meant of data encapsulation? Don't verify this. It's very simple. Whenever you are grouping your data members with related functionalities, that process itself is called as data encapsulation. When you are encapsulating your data with related functionalities, that process is called as data encapsulation. How this can be achieved? This can be achieved through both structure as well as class. But here we are discussing object-oriented programming concept. That's why forget about structure. How this can be implemented? This can be achieved through a class. Is it clear? Who will implement data encapsulation? A class. Because if you want to encapsulate your data with related functionalities, if you want to group your data with related functionalities in a single container, we need a class. So data encapsulation can be implemented through a class. Any questions, guys?
No, sir.
No.
Okay. Next, out of 3, we learn 1. You just need to learn only 3. Next, what is data abstraction? What is data abstraction? Simple. You already learned, you already implemented it. For example, you have console.readline. What is readline? It will take care of reading data. What is writeline? It will take care of writing data. So when you talk about readline is a method which comes with a console class, right? Readline is a method which, so we are accessing this method using class name. It means it is a static method. Okay. When you talk about readline, you just know what is the use of readline, where it is available, and how to use it. Do you know the background implementation of readline? The background coding part? Do you know the background implementation of writeline? Are they providing the background implementation of readline? Are they providing background implementation of writeline? Like how
No.
did they implement it? No. We just know the name of this method, the use of this method, and how to use this, and where it is available. But we don't know the actual background implementation of this. So when you are providing only functionalities to the users without presenting any background implementation part, when you are providing only functionalities to the user without presenting any background implementation part, yet they're not providing any background implementation. They're just providing the functionalities, their names, that's it. This concept is called as data abstraction. For example, we have implemented a class. Right? Simple. For example, here I'm writing a class, public class sum A, which contains a method called public void M1. Right? If someone wants to access my class, what should I do? Do I need to provide the complete background implementation of my class? No. Just create object of your class. And provide only this object. You don't have to provide whatever is written over there. Here I have written 1,000 lines of code. If someone wants to access my method, do I need to provide the complete background implementation of my method? Like whatever the code I have written? No. Just create object of your class. Provide only this object to the user. You don't have to provide the complete class and the complete background implementation. What has to be provided to the end user? Only object of your class has to be provided. If I provide this object, what they can see the functionalities that are available in my class, right? They can only see the functionality name. They can access it using that name, but they cannot see the actual background implementation of M1. Can they see the implementation of M1 in the calling environment? Guys?
No, they can't.
No.
Here it is showing only functionality name, but it is not presenting any background implementation of M1. Inside M1, we have written 1,000 lines of code. Is it showing that? No. Here we are presenting only functionalities to the user, end user, whoever is accessing our methods. He will become end user. We are providing only functionalities of our class, but we are not presenting any background implementation. It means it is providing a lot of security to your code, right? So through the object, with the help of object, we are able to provide only functionalities to the user. We are not presenting any background implementation of this method. This process is called as data abstraction. Data abstraction. When you are providing only functionalities to the user without presenting any background implementation part, that process is called as data abstraction. So data abstraction provides a lot of security to your code. And how did we achieve this? Through object. How did we achieve this? Through object. Create object of your class. Just provide only that object. That object will hide your actual implementation. It will show only your method names. Read me. So when you are hiding the actual implementation and providing only method names in the calling environment, that is called as data abstraction. So how can we achieve a data abstraction? Through object. Object implements data abstraction. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now I will ask the question. I used to ask this question many people in interviews whenever I was taking the interviews, but nobody, almost 99% of the people did not answer my question. They used to say so many things, lot of things, but not relevant. Simple question. What is the difference between a class and object? They should tell me like object is the instance of class and class creates object. Get into the reality. What does it do? What does it implement in the reality? What is the difference between a class and object? Guys, think and tell me. Now you know what is data encapsulation and how it can be implemented. Now you know what is data abstraction, how this can be achieved. Now tell me, what is the difference between a class and object?
Collection of objects. I mean, class is like a collection of objects.
Mm-hmm.
The class will represent an object, but object cannot represent a class.
Okay, next. Simple, guys. We know that data encapsulation. Data encapsulation is a process of binding data with related functionalities. How this can be achieved? Through a class. How do I bind my data with related functionalities? How do I group my data with related functionalities? Through class. And when it comes to data abstraction, what is meant by data abstraction? It is a process of hiding your actual implementation, providing only functionalities to the users. How this can be achieved? This can be achieved through a object. Simple. What is the difference between a class and object? A class implements data encapsulation, whereas an object implements data abstraction. Class needs object, object needs class. These are two different entities. The purposes are different. First, encapsulate your data with related functionalities. Develop your programs, write your programs. Now, how do I provide security to my code? If this has to be reused by someone, they can steal my data. They can steal my code. How do I provide? For example, Microsoft has implemented MS Office, right? MS Office. Inside that product, they might have written millions lines of code. Have you ever seen the background implementation of any functionality of Microsoft Office? No. If that is provided, if that is disclosed to the end user, what will you do? Very next day, you will copy
You
that
will
code,
copy.
create same
Yeah.
product and give your name. Dantu office, Sridhar office, Prasad office.
Duplication.
You should, there is no security. If that is disclosed, Microsoft spend millions of dollars to develop that product. If the background implementation of that product is disclosed to the end user, what end user will do? In one day, will copy the complete code and build his own product. Right? So, as part of data encapsulation, you define thousands of data members, you written thousands of member functions, methods, subprograms, and you develop your component. If someone wants to reuse your component, how do they reuse it? They have to create instance of your class. Using that instance, for example, object, obj, if I press obj dot, if you're the complete background implementation of whatever you've written inside your class, if the complete part is disclosed to the end user, if that is provided to the end user, what happens? Next time will not ask you to provide your component. You stop reusing your component. Whatever you have written here, if that whole thing is provided to the end user, what happens? He will just copy your code, build his own component. From next time onwards, he will never look into your component. He will just stop reusing your component. Rather, you will develop your own component because your logic is already disclosed to him. Where is the security for your code? Not only to data, you should also provide security to your code. Because I spent a lot of time, I spent a lot of money to develop this component. Now, what should I do? I should protect my code. Only names of my functionality should be available to the end user. That too, I'll have to decide which functionality should be available, which should not be available. And whenever they press obj dot, your object dot, they should be able to see only function names, but not the background implementation of that function name. Right? So once your class is ready, how do I expose my functionality to the end user? By hiding my code. How do I protect my code from end user? There, your object will come into the picture. What object will do? Object would implement data abstraction. It will hide the background implementation of your functionalities, and it shows only your method names. They can see the functionality names, but they cannot see what is written inside that functionality. So, if someone asks you this question, you should tell them the reality, like the real-time example, real-time definition. What is the difference between a class and object? A class implements data encapsulation, whereas an object implements data abstraction.
Okay, sir.
Okay, any questions, guys? So we have created a lot of classes. So it means we have already implemented data encapsulation. Now we know how to define data members, member functions, how to build them using a class. We have created so many objects for so many classes, right? We also have implemented data abstraction. So out of 4 principles, now we are aware of 2. So to become expert in OOP, all you need to do is you just need to learn the rest of 2 topics, inheritance and polymorphism. Inheritance and polymorphism. If you are aware of these 2, then you can start developing reusable components. Any questions?
No, sir.
Let's move towards the next concept. Inheritance. Inheritance. What is the need of inheritance? Simple. As I said, the ultimate goal of every object-oriented principle is reusability. Let's say you developed some component in the sense a class. Let's say you developed a math component. Now I got a new requirement. I'm going to write a new class. in one of the requirement, I need to do some calculation of some sin 30, cos 30, tan 30, which has already been developed by you. That functionality is already there in your component. Why should I write it again and again? I need to spend a lot of time to write that same piece of code again and again. It means it will consume a lot of time. Lot of time will be wasted and revenue will also be wasted. Rather, I can inherit properties of your class. I can start reusing your component. Why don't you reuse your component? If I reuse it, I can save a lot of time, right? I can save a lot of money, lot of revenue to the company, right? So what is inheritance? It is a process of reusing one component in another component. It is a process of reusing one component in another component. If you look into the definition, it is the process of acquiring the properties of. What is meant by a property? Property of a class. A property means it can be a data member, it can be a public property, it can be a method. Right? I told in the beginning, when you want to access any property of a class, you should create the object. What is meant by a property? A data member is called as a property. A method is called as a property. A public property is called as a property. Property in the sense, it can be a data member, it can be a method, it can be anything. So it is a process of acquiring is like reusing. It is a process of acquiring the properties of one entity. Entity means a class. It is a process of acquiring the properties of one class into another class, one entity into another. It is a process of reusing the properties of one class in another class, one component in another component. That is called inheritance. If something has already been developed, just inherit the properties of that component and reuse them in your component. Any questions, guys?
No, sir.
Okay. For example, here we have class A, which contains method 1. This is class B, which contains method 2. These two are two independent classes. There is no relation between these two. Right? Now, if I create object to A or B, if I create object to B, using B object, I'll be able to access the properties of only B because there is no relation between A and B. If I want to access the properties of A, what has to be done? One more separate object has to be created for class A. Ready me? Simple. This is class A. Now I'm going to create class B. Right? Class B contains M2. Now here I created object to A. Use, let's see. If I press obj dot, see I can access only M1. Can I access class B? Property M2? No. Here it is not showing. I cannot access because these two are two independent classes. B will have its own context. A will have its own context. Right? If I create object to A, I can access only A properties. If I create object to B, I can access only B properties. Right? A cannot access B, B cannot access A without creating an instance. Okay. So here I created object to B. Now if I say obj.method 1, yes, what is the method 1? Method 1 is from A. Is it going to be accepted or throws the error? Using B object, I'm trying to access A. Will it be accepted?
No.
No, because using B, you'll be able to access only B. If you want to access A, we are trying to access A method using B object. It will not be accepted. But if you still want to access the properties of one class using another class object, now these two are two independent classes. There is no relation between A and B. That's why using one class object, you cannot access another class properties. But if I want to do that, if I want to access the properties of one class using another class object, what has to be done? Now, these two are two independent classes. There is no relation. B doesn't know anything about A, doesn't know anything about B. If you still want to access the properties of one class using another class, so some relation has to be established between A and B. some relation has to be established between A and B. That relation is called as inheritance. Once the relation gets established between A and B, A will become your relative. In the beginning, we were talking about relatives while discussing about access specifiers, protected. Ready me? If you want grant access to someone, someone has to be allowed to access your properties without creating any object. That someone should be considered as your relative. Some relation has to be established between your class and your relative class. Once it becomes your relative, now you don't have to create any separate object to your relative. Using your object, you can directly access the properties of your relative. That relation is nothing but your inheritance. Okay. Let's see how to do this. So when you talk about inheritance, it is a process of reusing one component in another component, one class in another class. Is it clear, guys? What is the use of inheritance? Whenever you want to reuse the functionalities of one class in your class or in another class, then we require the concept of inheritance. Okay. Now we will see in how many different ways a component can be reused and how to establish the relation between one component between another component. So when you talk about inheritance, an inheritance can be implemented in 4 different ways. It means a component can be reused in 4 different ways. We can use 4 different techniques to reuse the component in different ways. What are those? Single inheritance, hierarchical inheritance, multi-level inheritance, and multiple inheritance. Okay, it means a component can be reused in these many different ways. Okay, and we named them as single, hierarchical, multi-level, multiple. These are different requirements. Okay, let's move towards the first one, that is single inheritance. Let's say class A, which contains method 1, class B, which contains method 2. Now, in class B, in one of the requirement, I'm supposed to develop the same functionality which is already there in class A. Whatever is there in method 1, here I need to develop the same functionality to fulfill one of the requirement. Why should I rewrite it again and again? Because this is already there in A. Why don't we reuse it? Are you to me? Okay. Now, if I want to call the method of A in my class, what has to be done? I should create the object explicitly of A. Using A object only, I'll be able to call A methods. Otherwise, I cannot call it. Now, I want to access the methods of A in B without creating any object. It means I would like to reuse the components of A in B without creating any object. I would like to acquire the properties of A into B without creating any object of A. I'd like to reuse the properties of A into B without creating any object. Now these are independent classes. You cannot do that. B cannot access A without creating A object. A cannot access B without creating B object. Right? So if you still want to do that, when you want to access the properties of one class in another class without creating any object of that respective class, what has to be done? Then some relation has to be established between these two. Some relation has to be established between these two classes. What is that relation? That relation is called as single inheritance. Once this relation gets established, now A will become your relative. A will become your relative. Right? Now you are going to acquire the properties of A into B. Alright? B is not going to be reached by A. A is going to be reached by B. So whoever is having these reusable functionalities, are right to me. So here A is going to be reached by B. Here B is called as upper class. A is called as upper class, B is called as lower class. Here A is going to be reached by B. B is inheriting the properties of A. Are you following me, guys? B wants to reuse the properties of A. B wants to inherit the properties of A. Right? Here B is inheriting the properties from A. In this case, A will become your superclass and B will be called as subclass. People will call it in different names. Whatever is being reused will become your superclass. Your A is called as superclass. And whoever is reusing them will call as subclass. Okay, A will become super, B will become sub, and A can also be called as a parent. Parent. We can call it as upper class, super class, and parent. B is going to be called as lower class, subclass, a child. You can call it with any name. Are you with me? So in this case, A will become your parent, B will become your child. It's like father-son relationship. Father-son relationship. A will become your father and B is son. Simple. When it comes to our general property relations. For example, your father bought some property, is having some properties. Will you have right to access your father properties? Obviously. Now, if I want to access your father properties, can I? No. Because there is no relation between your father and me. But there is a relation between you and your father. Only his relative will have right to access his father properties. And try to understand that relation. If your father buys something, you will have right to access your father properties. It means you can directly access your father properties. No object is required. If you buy something, let's say you got married and you bought a new property. Can your father access your property? He will never have right to access your properties. A son will have right to access father properties, but a father will not have right to access son properties. Try to understand the concept. You will have right to access your father properties, but your father will never have right to access son properties, your properties. It means if I want to access my father properties, I will have right to access my father properties anytime. I can directly access my father properties. It means if you want to access your father properties, no object is required. Without creating any object, you can directly access your father properties. The same strategy is followed here, the human relationships. But when it comes to your father, you will never have right to access your properties. You cannot access your properties without creating any object. Guys, are you following me?
Yes, sir.
So, if son wants to access the properties of parent, he can directly access them without creating any object. But if father wants to access the properties of son, he cannot access son properties without creating any object. Are you with me? So, when it comes to B, B will have right to access his own properties as well as his father properties. Right? I can enjoy my properties and my father, whatever my father earned, I will also have access to that. So when it comes to B, B will have privilege of accessing, enjoying his properties as well as his father properties. It means if I create object to B, using B, I'll be able to access both B as well as A. Because B will have right to access his own properties as well as his father properties. But when it comes to father, father can enjoy only his own properties. He cannot enjoy his son properties. You will never have right to access son properties. It means if I create object A, father can access his own properties. He cannot access son properties. It means if the object is created to A can access only A cannot access B. But if the object is created to B can access his own properties as well as his father properties. Okay, in inheritance, the same human relation strategy is followed. Right? According to law, a son can enjoy his properties, own properties, whatever he earn, he can enjoy that, as well as he could also enjoy his father properties. But when it comes to father, he can enjoy his father properties, but he cannot enjoy son property. Right? So try to understand the concept. With this, what I was trying to say here is, B can directly access the properties of A. Once this relation gets established between two classes, A will become superclass or parent. B will become sub or child. Parent and child. Super and sub. Right? So when it comes to child can access his own properties as well as his father properties. So B can access his properties. He can directly access his father properties without creating any object. I mean, finally, if I create object to B, using B object, I can access my father properties directly. Using B object, you can access B method 2 as well as you could also access A. But if I create object to A, using A, I'll be able to access only A. I cannot access B. Right? So once this relation gets established, you will be able to acquire the properties of your parent without creating any object. You can directly start reusing them. But how do I establish this relation in C#? Simple. Let's say this is class A, which has method 1. While writing your class B, you have to use a keyword called this colon. Class B colon A. It means this will define the relationship between B and A. It will create a parent-child relationship between B and A. In this case, A will become parent, B is going to be child. Right? Whenever you need to reuse the components of any class, you should create a relation between that class and your class. How do I create the relation? Using colon. Okay, I want to reuse the functionalities of A in B. Now what should I do? I should create a relationship between B and A. Now A is going to be reused in B. So A will become superclass, parent class. Are you getting me? And B will become child. Any questions, guys?
No, sir.
So let's implement this. Okay. Now, this is class A, which has M1. Okay, I'm just writing a small statement. Console.writeLine. Hey, I am from parent A. Now this is class B. This one. This one. Up. Just print some message. I am from child B. See, till now, these two are two independent classes. There is no relation between A and B. So, if I create object to be A, what happens? I can access only A. Obj dot. So, I can access only M1. Right? I cannot access B. If I create object to B, what happens? I can access only M2. Right? Using B object, I cannot access A because A doesn't know anything about B, B doesn't know anything about A. Now, if B wants to reuse the functionalities of A without creating any object, what has to be done? You should create a relation between B and A. How do I do that? Use colon. B colon. I want to reuse A. Now what happens? A will become your relative. A will become your parent. And B is going to be child. Yes. Now if I use B object, obj dot. Now see. Who is M1? M1 is from A. I am able to access my father properties. Who is M2? My own properties. Now we are able to access both B as well as A. Are we creating? A is also a class. When you want to access the properties of A, the respect to object has to be created. But are we creating any object of A? No. Without creating any object, using B object, I'm able to access all properties of both A and B. Any questions, guys?
No, sir.
Obj dot into. Now, if the object B will have right to access his properties, father properties. But let's see, A. Let's create object to A. Obj A is equal to new A. Let's say if the object is created to A. Can I access B? Let's see. Dot. See, using A, I can access only A. I cannot access B. Because A will never have right to access his son properties. But B will have access to his father properties and his own properties. Try to understand this concept. If the object is created to B, you can access both A and B. But if the object is created to A, you can access only A. Any questions, guys? This is called single inheritance. When you are acquiring the properties of only one entity into another entity. Here we are reusing the properties of only one class. In some other scenario, there are many classes like A, B, C, D. Here we are reusing the properties of only one class. In one of the scenario, one method is available in one class, one method is available in another class. And I want to reuse both. I want to reuse the functionalities of more than one class. Ready me? And there can be another requirement. Here I am reusing the properties of A. There is another class. You may be interested in my class. You may want to reuse my properties. Ready me? That happens. Okay. So when it comes to single inheritance, single means what? When you are inheriting the properties of only one entity into another entity, that is called as single inheritance. We are acquiring the properties of only one entity at a time. When you are reusing only one component at a time in your class, that concept is called as single inheritance. Any questions, guys?
No, sir.
Okay.
No.
Next, I have another requirement. The same class A. In previous scenario, class A is being reused by only one class, but it can be reused by other classes, right? Anyone can reuse A. So in another scenario, now there is another class called C. E is also interested to reuse A. Now, if I establish the relation between B, A, C, A, now what happens? Now B can access the properties of A. I mean, A can be reused by B as well as A can also be reused by C. It's like a father with two sons. A father and two sons, two childs. Simple. General human strategy. When it comes to B, B is the first son of A. B will have access to his father properties, his own properties, but he cannot have right on his brother properties. I mean, B will have direct access to his father properties, his own properties, but he will never have right to access his brother properties, C. Right? Same thing with C. C can access his father properties, his own properties, but he cannot access his brother properties, B. It means if the object is created to B, B will have right to A and B, but he cannot access C. If the object is created to C, C will have right to his father and his own, A and C, but he cannot have access to B. Are you following me, guys?
Yes, sir.
Right? If your brother buys some property, will you have the right? No. You can access only your father property, but you cannot have access to your brother property. Right? Similar strategy. Okay. So if the object is created to be, so one component can be reused by n number of components. Now your A is being used by B, A is being reused by C, A can be reused by D, A can also be reused by E. Once you develop a reusable component, it can be reused by a number of people, right? It's like a parent with a number of childs. This concept is called as hierarchical inheritance. This concept. When a component is being reused by multiple components, that process is called as hierarchical inheritance. It is a process of acquiring the properties of one entity into multiple entities. It is a process of acquiring the properties of one entity into multiple entities. The process of reusing the properties of one class into multiple classes is called as hierarchical inheritance. Now what I have to do? Class A is a reusable component. Now I'm writing class B. I want to reuse A. What should I do? I should establish a relation between B and A. Now there is another class, class C. E also wants to reuse A. What should I do? I should establish the relation between C and A. And this is class D. If class D wants to reuse the properties of A, I should establish one more relation between A and D. Right? Let's do this. Now it is already being reused by B. Now A, C, there is another class called C. E is also interested to reuse our class. Class C, which inherits A. Right? Now,
అన్న ఒక డౌట్
now,
ఓకే
చెప్పు.
ఇప్పుడు క్లాస్ సి డైరెక్ట్ గా క్లాస్ బిని ఇన్హెరిట్ చేస్తే ఇప్పుడు బిలో ఏ ప్రాపర్టీస్ ఉంటాయి కదా
Right. Exactly.
ట్రాన్సిషన్
That will
ప్రాపర్టీ
be our
ఉంటుందా?
next concept. Very good thought. Anyone can
ఓకే
use anyone. Okay. Anyone can reuse anyone. Any component
ఓకే
can use any component. Say C can also
ఇప్పుడు
reuse B.
యా
For example,
ఓకే
if I have a requirement of reusing both B and A, what should I do? Instead of inheriting A, if I inherit B, I can access both A and B. Are you reading me? Okay, I'll tell you. That will be our next concept. Okay.
ఓకే
Now M3 means method 3. And let's give different name like MA means method of A. MB method of B. MC. I am from child 1. A I am from child 2. Right? Same concept. If I create object to C, what happens? I can access C and A because there is some relation between C and A, but there is no relation between B and C, right? So I can access only C and A. I cannot access B. Here I can access using B object. I can access B and A, but I cannot access C. Now let's do this. Now I'm going to create object to B. Now what happens? Using obj B. Obj B. What I can do? I can access method of A and method of B, but I cannot access method of C. And ఏంటి సింపుల్. ఇప్పుడు మీ డాడీ ప్రాపర్టీ కొంటే నీకు రైట్ ఉంటుంది, మీ బ్రదర్ ప్రాపర్టీ మీద రైట్ ఉంటుందా? నీకు ఉండదు. అర్థమైందా? సేమ్ అంటే మీ యూ విల్ హ్యావ్ యాక్సెస్ టు యువర్ ఫాదర్ ప్రాపర్టీస్, యువర్ ఓన్ ప్రాపర్టీస్, బట్ యూ విల్ నాట్ హ్యావ్ యాక్సెస్ టు యువర్ బ్రదర్ ప్రాపర్టీస్. సో యూజింగ్ B, I can access B and A, but I cannot access, though is my brother, but still I will not have right to my brother properties. You can access only A and B. Now, if I create object to C, C, obj C is equal to new C. Using C, I can access, your brother will have right to your father and your brother properties, but he cannot access your properties. So obj C dot C, I can access A and C, but I cannot access B. Right? See, I'm parent and child 1, parent, child 2. Any questions, guys?
No.
Okay, this concept is called as hierarchical. Okay, and next, your concept. Here, A, B. B is inheriting the properties of A. Now, B is nothing but A plus B. If the object is created to B, I can access, using B object, I can access both A and B. Here, now I'm writing C. C have a requirement of reusing both A and B. C have a requirement of reusing both A and B. Now what I will do, if I establish a relation between A and C, what happens? I can access only A and C. If I establish relation between B and C, I can access only B and C. Alright, but if I establish the relation between B and C here, what happens? B is already inheriting the properties of A. If I create B is nothing but now A and B. B will have access to both A and B. Right? So if I want to inherit the properties of both A and B, I don't need to establish a relation between both A and B, because B is nothing but A and B. It is already inheriting the properties of A. If I establish the relation between B and C, what happens? I can access both B as well as A. It's like child, father, and grandfather. Try to understand strategy. Your grandfather, father, and child. Simple. Child will have right to access his father properties as well as grandfather properties. As per the Indian law, child will have access to his father properties as well as grandfather properties. It means now if I create object to C, C can access C, his father B, his father A, grandfather. If the object is created to C, C will have right to his father properties as well as his grandfather properties. So using C, you'll be able to access C, B, A. Next, when it comes to father, father will have right to his father properties, means your grandfather properties. Your grandfather is father, right? Your father. So your father will have right to access his father properties, but he cannot access his son properties. మన father కి మన గ్రాండ్ ఫాదర్ మీద రైట్ ఉంటుంది, బట్ మన మీద రైట్ ఉండదు కదా. I mean, if the object is created to B, B can access B and A, but he cannot access C. Next, when it comes to grandfather, grandfather can enjoy his own properties, but he cannot enjoy, he will not have right to access his father and his grandson. So if the object is created to A, you can access only A. If the object is created to B, you can access both A and B. If the object is created to C, you can access both A, B, and C. So when C wants to inherit the properties, reuse the functionalities of both A and B, you don't have to inherit them separately. Rather, B is already inheriting the properties of A. If you just establish the relation between B and C, right? So C will become child of B. B is already child of A. So B will become your parent. A will become B parent. So in this scene, in this relation, B will become your father. A will become your grandfather. Right? Now, A can reuse the functionalities of B and A directly. Any questions, guys?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, class A. B wants to reuse the functionalities of A. What we did? While creating B, we established the relation between B and A. Now, B is reusing the functionalities of A. If an object is created to B, I can access both A and B. Now, B is nothing but A and B. Now, if C wants to reuse the functionalities of both A and B, what C should do? C just need to inherit the properties of B. Right? If a relation establish relation between B is nothing but A and B. Using C, I'll be able to access both A, B, and C. Let's do that. Now what I will do, I'm just going to change the relation. B is inheriting the properties of A. Now C wants to reuse both A and B. So you just need to inherit B. Grandparent, grandfather, father, child, right? C is inheriting B, but B is inheriting A. So C will have access to his father properties as well as his grandfather properties. B will have access to his own properties and his father properties. Let's see that. Now, if I create object to A, obj A, what happens? A is grandfather. Grandfather will have right to access to his only own properties. He cannot have access to his son or his grandson properties. So if I say obj A dot, I can access only A. I cannot access B and C. Right? Now let's create object to B. B obj B is equal to new B. Now when it comes to B, B will have right to access his father properties, but he cannot access his son. It means B can access his father A and his own B, but he cannot access his child C. See, I can access my father and my own, but I cannot access my child. Right? Next, if the object is created to child C, so child will have access to his father B and his grandfather A. Obj C dot. Now I can access A, B, and C. I can access my grandfather and I can access properties of my father and I can access properties of my own. You need to understand this relation, man. Any questions?
No, sir.
This is called as multi-level inheritance. Multi-level. When you want to acquire the properties of one entity which is already acquiring the properties of another entity is called as multi-level. Okay, so when you want to reuse the properties of one entity which is already reusing the properties of another entity, then we require this concept. There are set of classes. One class has already been acquired into another one. If I want to reuse those two, why should I inherit them separately? Rather, whatever the class is reusing the properties of another class, just get that acquired into your class. That's all. Okay. Next, if someone wants to reuse the properties of A, B, and C, they don't have to, reuse them separately. If I establish a relation between C and my class, now I can reuse the properties of all the three classes. It's like something like this, D. If I have a requirement of reusing these three, I don't have to, acquire them separately. Rather, just establish a relation between C and D. Now what happens? D can reuse the properties of all the above levels. This concept is called as multi-level inheritance. Any questions, guys?
No, sir.
No.
Okay. So now you understood single. Whenever you have a requirement of acquiring the properties of only one entity at a time, that concept is called single inheritance. You will be able to inherit the properties of only one entity at a time. What is hierarchy? One component can be reused by n number of components. That is hierarchical. Next, when you want to reuse the properties of one entity, which has already been derived from another entity, then it is called multi-level. So far, we have reused only one entity at a time. Here we have reused only one entity at a time. Here we have reused only one entity at a time. Here also we have reused only one entity at a time. Right? Now, if I want to reuse the properties of more than one entity at a time, A has its own unique set of functionalities. B has its own unique set of functionalities. There is no relation between A and B. Okay, method 1 is there in A, method 2 is there in B. These are two independent classes. These two are there in two different libraries. Now I want to reuse the properties of more than one class at a time. In this case, how should I write my logic? This is A, it has M1. This is B, it has M2. If I want to reuse the properties of both A and B, I should write something like A comma B. And there is another class, E. Right? Now I can reuse the properties of n number of classes at a time, right? There should not be any limitation. Right? In this case, what you have to do? You should establish the relation between multiple classes. You should establish the relation between A. You should establish the relation between B. Are you with me? So when you want to inherit the properties of more than one entity at a time, then you need to inherit the properties of more than one class at a time. This is not possible with classes. This is not possible with classes. Classes doesn't support. This concept is called as multiple inheritance. It's very, very important question. Many interviewers will ask this question. Classes doesn't support multiple inheritance directly. I mean, a class can inherit the properties of only one class at a time. A class cannot inherit the properties of more than one independent class at a time. So, multiple inheritance is not supported through classes. This is very, very important question. But how do we achieve this? So this can be achieved through another mechanism called interface. Interface. Later we will see how to achieve multiple inheritance using interface. Any questions, guys?
No, sir.
Okay. So it's very, very important. Does classes supports multiple inheritance? No. Why? A class can inherit the properties of only one class at a time. But when it comes to multiple inheritance, it should be able to inherit the properties of more than one class at a time, which is not supported through class. That's why classes doesn't support multiple inheritance. But it can be achieved using another technique called interface. Okay. So in the next class, we will discuss about other things like what is an abstract method, what is interface, and what is polymorphism, method overloading, method overriding. That ends your object-oriented programming. Okay. Out of three techniques, we have seen four techniques. Only four principles, right? We have implemented encapsulation, we have implemented abstraction, we know how to reuse the properties of one entity into another entity. Here, only one thing left in inheritance is multiple inheritance. Tomorrow we will see how to implement multiple inheritance using interfaces. Then we'll go with polymorphism. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So I'd be needing more 3 to 4 sessions to complete your C#. So tomorrow we will be finishing object-oriented programming. In the next session, we're going to cover your delegates, some advanced programming with your threads and delegates, and asynchronous programming. Then one session for your link queue, the basics of link queue, how to write link queue queries, how to access data for your collections using link queue. Okay. And your events, event handlers, this will be covered as part of your Windows programming. Again, delegates will be repeated again. All this stuff will be repeated. So C# is a like core programming language. Whenever you want to develop your Windows or web anything, let's say if there is a button on your screen, if I click on that button, some action has to be performed. Where do I write that action? That action has to be written using C#. It is a standalone application, Windows application, web application, it can be anything. If some action has to be performed, where do I write that action? That has to be written inside C#. That's why you should become expert in C#. If you're good in C#, you can easily play with all options of your Windows, web, and other stuff. Okay. If you're really good in loops, collections, and object-oriented programming, this should be enough for a developer to work with any kind of application. Okay, that's why I want you to practice as many examples as you can in the area of loops, collections, and object-oriented programming.
Okay.
In the real-time application, you'll be working with only these concepts. Any questions, guys?
No, sir.
Okay, so tomorrow we'll finish object-oriented programming. So as I said, we're needing more 3 to 4 sessions to finish C#. Then we'll start with GUI-based applications. We will see how to design a standalone Windows-based application like your WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger, Gtalk. Okay, then we will move on to web, like your remoting web API and MVC. Then .NET Core. Okay. Any questions, guys? If no, let me
No.
stop this session here. But please do practice the examples. Okay, I think Sridhar has sent that assignment. Okay, I'll look into it today and let you know.
Okay, I'll also send, sir.
Okay.
I'll
Okay.
send it now.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. Have a good night.